Welcome to episode 4. Oh, you humans wouldn't believe the things we do when we find something really good. A bone? Forget about it. It's not just grabbing and going. There's a whole process. First the sniff, a really thorough sniff. Then the circle, gotta make sure it's really there. Sometimes a little bow. It's respect, you know? It's like a sacred object. That first encounter is everything. But seriously, the ritual is key. To explain all this better, I'll let my friends Tokyo and Nancy take it from here.
Have you ever given your dog a big, fresh bone, maybe the first time they've ever had one quite like it, and watched them do something truly, well, odd?
Yeah, like bowing to it or walking in these careful circles around it.
Exactly. Sometimes even tapping their head on the ground nearby. It looks like this strange, almost ritualistic dance.
It really does.
So we're tackling this specific behavior today, and huge thanks to a listener who sent us a great stack of sources after seeing their own dog do exactly this routine.
Which is super helpful.
We're going to pull out the key insights from these sources. There's an ethological analysis, pretty technical, and also an article aimed more at dog owners.
Right, giving us both angles.
Our mission is basically to understand what the science says is really going on beneath this, seemingly weird display. Let's unlock the meaning behind this canine bone ritual.
And it's great having these two types of sources, like you said. The ethology one gives us the deep science, the terminology, while the owner-focused article kind of translates it into practical terms we can relate to. Let's just see it from both sides.
Okay, so where do we even begin unpacking this? Well, the sources immediately jump on the most obvious thing. The sensory experience for the dog. It's massive.
Oh, unbelievably so. Just think about their sense of smell compared to ours.
We've got maybe, 5 million scent receptors?
And dogs.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions. It varies by breed, but orders of magnitude more. So a fresh bone, especially one with marrow.
It's like an olfactory explosion hitting that super sensitive nose.
Exactly. And it's not just strong. The sources really highlight how incredibly information-rich it is for them.
Information-rich? How so?
Well, their amazing olfactory system, not just the number of receptors, but, how the air flows, even the vomeronasal organ, the VNO.
The second nose thing.
Right. It picks up less volatile stuff. So this bone is basically broadcasting detailed info species, freshness, tissue state, like a whole biological report card via scent.
Wow. Okay, so that intense sensory input alone could be a lot, maybe even overwhelming.
Absolutely. Which connects directly to our listener's idea about scent overload, doesn't it? It's a huge amount of stimulation.
And then there's the fact that it's often the first time a dog encounters something exactly like this specific bone, not just a dry chew, but something closer to the source.
Yes. That novelty factor is huge. You've got this intense smell, and it's unfamiliar.
That sounds like a recipe for some interesting behavior right there.
It really is. Because novelty in dogs triggers two competing instincts,
Okay.
There's neophilia, that innate curiosity, the attraction to new stuff, especially potential food. That part's saying, ooh, treasure.
Makes sense.
But then there's also neophobia, that natural caution, a wariness towards unfamiliar things, particularly if they're potent or seem unusual. That part's saying, whoa, hold on, what is this really?
So you got this super high value thing bombarding them with intense info-packed smells. And their brain is kind of torn between, yes, gimme, and wait, okay, what is this? That tension. The sources suggest that's where this whole sequence really kicks off.
Precisely. That intense stimulus, the novelty, the high value, it creates this state of really high arousal. Their system is basically shouting, pay attention.
Right.
And that internal push-pull, wanting it but also being a bit cautious, that's the core conflict, which totally supports that scent overload or stimulus overwhelm idea as the trigger. How they deal with that feeling, that's where the ritual starts.
Okay, let's break down the pieces of that processing, that ritual. The listener specifically mentioned bowing. Now, we usually think a dog bow means let's play.
Right, the classic play bow.
But they're bowing to a bone. How does that fit?
Yeah, that's where the sources really help us see the nuance. The classic play bow, front down, butt up, maybe a wag that's social.
To another dog, or to us.
Exactly, but a bow aimed at an object, that's different. The ethology source points out structurally it looks similar, but the context is completely non-social.
So it's not a play invitation. Could it be like a stretch, that prayer bow thing?
It might look a bit like that stretch, yeah. But again, the context here seems really specific to the dog's interaction with this high-value novel object.
So if it's not play with the bone, what's it doing? What could the bill mean here?
This is where the idea of displacement behavior becomes super important for understanding this whole thing.
Displacement. Okay, unpack that a bit.
So given that high arousal and the internal conflict, we talked about wanting the bone versus being cautious about it.
That approach avoidance conflict.
Exactly. The dog needs an outlet for that tension, that conflicted energy. Displacement behaviors are basically normal actions, like suddenly sniffing the ground or yawning or scratching or even stretching or bowing, but done out of context.
So they're feeling conflicted or stressed and they just do something else, kind of random?
Pretty much. It helps them manage that intense internal state. Buys them a second, gives them a physical action to sort of dissipate some energy and maybe process what's happening.
Okay, so the bow isn't necessarily directed at the bone with a specific meaning, but more like a release valve for the dog's internal state.
That's what the sources strongly suggest, yes. The energy from that, I want it, but what is it? Conflict has to go somewhere. The bow, in this context, looks like a prime example of displacement.
Gotcha. And our listener mentioned something even more specific. Their dog would sometimes tap its head down while bowing. Maybe even in little circles. That sounds really unusual.
It is unusual for a standard bow play or displacement, and the sources actually touch on actions like this. It's not typically part of the pattern.
So what's the thinking there?
The most likely interpretation seems to be cautious, tactile exploration.
Tactile, like touching.
Yeah. Dogs explore with their noses and mouths, obviously, but they also use their heads to gently touch or nudge things. Think about how they might nudge something unfamiliar.
Okay, so instead of grabbing this intense new thing right away, the head tap is like a less committed way to make physical contact, to investigate.
Exactly that. It fits perfectly with the neophobia, the cautious side. It's a way to physically interact without fully committing to biting or picking it up yet, like a gentle, whoa, what does this feel like, Tess?
And this is probably a really important point for owners. This is not the same as pathological head pressing, right?
Absolutely. Critical distinction. The sources are very clear. Pathological head pressing is a serious neurological sign. The dog, compulsively, often blankly, presses its head against walls or furniture.
Right, unresponsive.
Totally different. The dog here is active, engaged with the bone, mobile, focused, choosing to tap. It's worlds away from the medical issue. Key takeaway.
Okay, so the head tap is cautious investigation, maybe folded into the displacement activity. What about the circling? The dog walks around the bone.
Circling's another one with multiple meanings. Context is key again. Sure, it can be stress, just pacing, or excitement, like happy zoomies.
But this sounds more structured, like circling around it.
Exactly. When a dog circles a specific item like this bone, the sources lean towards interpretations tied to its value and novelty.
Like assessment. Checking it out from all sides.
Assessment is definitely a big part. Moving around lets them gather olfactory info from every angle, get a good visual inspection, just gather more data on this really significant object. It's focused movement around the prize.
Okay.
The sources also suggest it could be a kind of low-level claiming or patrolling. Before settling down with a super high-value thing, a dog might do this circling, familiarizing itself, implicitly establishing its presence around it.
Huh. Almost like drawing a little invisible fence around it before they dig in.
Sort of, yeah. A very temporary, non-aggressive fence. It's assessing, familiarizing, maybe softly asserting mine over this amazing new find, all while still dealing with that initial high arousal.
So these things, the bowing, the head tap, the circling, they're not just random ticks. They seem like a connected sequence, the dog working through this intense experience.
That's exactly how the sources frame it. It's not a random collection. It's a confluence of signals reflecting a complex internal state. And the key concepts to understand it are definitely displacement behavior, that approach avoidance conflict, and potentially elements of appeasement.
Let's pull that appeasement idea back in. Our listener wondered about cautious respect, maybe seeing the bone as once alive. Does the science support that kind of intuition?
It really resonates, actually. If the dog perceives this big, fresh bone as something highly significant, maybe instinctually linking it to something powerful, something once alive, then the bowing, the gentle, cautious interaction, it could function as a form of self-appeasement. Or like a gesture acknowledging the object's weight or significance. It's a way the dog manages its own emotional response to this potent thing.
So it fits with the idea that the bone is both super desirable, but also maybe a little awe-inspiring.
It does. It fits that picture of the dog trying to process something complex.
Okay, so we've got the overwhelm, the conflict, displacement behaviors to cope, cautious exploration, potential appeasement. Is there an even deeper layer? Does this connect back to, like, their wild ancestors?
Oh, for sure. The sources make a strong link here. This whole complex reaction seems to tap right into deep-seated ancestral instincts around high-value food resources.
Because a fresh bone like this is pretty close to finding a natural kill in the wild, right?
Exactly. It mimics that scenario closely.
And what do wolves or wild dogs do when they find a kill? They don't just barge right in, do they?
Not usually, no. Wild command have very specific protocols. There's cautious investigation. Wolves, for instance, are incredibly wary and territorial around a big food source.
So what does that look like?
Circling warily first is really common. It lets them sniff from all angles, check out the surroundings, make sure the situation is safe, maybe ensure the prey is actually dead before they fully commit.
Ah, so our pet dogs circling around the bone, that careful approach. Could that be like a domesticated, maybe solitary echo of those ancient safety checks? An instinctual pause.
Precisely. The bone triggers that old script. It's biologically super relevant, so the instincts kick in. Investigate carefully. Approach with caution. It's like an echo of, is it really safe to tuck in? Acknowledging the significance.
And just to be clear, this isn't resource guarding, which involves aggression.
Totally different. Crucial distinction. Resource guarding is about aggressive defense, growling, snapping, biting to keep others away.
Right.
This bone ritual has none of that. It's a non-aggressive way of assessing and initially claiming the item. Before guarding might even come up, and maybe it never does, the dog goes through this process to understand the item, get familiar, integrate it.
So the circling and careful interaction are about engaging with the bone's value, just not defensively.
Exactly. It could even be seen as a very low-level guarding ritual in a non-aggressive sense, checking the perimeter before claiming it, a personal coming to terms with the treasure.
What about other instincts, like caching, burying bones? Does that play in?
Yeah, the sources mention that as another potential layer. Domestic dogs definitely keep that instinct to cache, to bury prized stuff for later.
Saving the treasure.
Right. So getting a super valuable bone might spark a conflict. Eat now. Or hide this amazing thing. Owners sometimes see whining or pacing with a new bone. That could be part of that conflict.
And the circling could be related to that too, like looking for a good spot.
It could partly be related, yeah. Assessing the environment, looking for a secure place to either eat it or maybe stash it without being interrupted. It's another one of those deep instincts interacting with the immediate situation.
Wow. Okay. So this whole performance, the bowing, head tapping, circling and circling, drawing on the intense sensory input, navigating that internal conflict, using displacement behaviors to cope, maybe showing some appeasement or respect. And it's tapping into ancient instincts for checking out kills and securing resources. It's layered.
Incredibly multifaceted. That's the picture the sources paint. It starts with the immediate physiological and psychological state, the overwhelm, the novelty conflict, managing arousal.
But the way they manage it.
Exactly. The specific form the behaviors take, the bowing, the circling, the tapping, seems deeply influenced by their evolutionary history. It's the dog's active, complex process for handling all that simultaneous input.
And the source has highlighted something important. This elaborate display is often most obvious during the first encounter.
That's a key point. Initial reactions to really significant new things are often more dramatic, more unique. As the dog gets more familiar with that kind of bone, the intensity and the ritual often fade.
They habituate. They learn how to handle it.
Right. The stimulus becomes less overwhelming, the conflict less intense.
So that scent overload curiosity idea our listener started with is definitely the foundation.
It's a great starting point.
But the dog's response is this incredibly rich, active, step-by-step process of processing and managing that initial flood. It's not just passive overload.
Precisely. And the specific choreography, the exact mix of bows and taps and circles, that might be a bit unique to that individual dog.
Their own little ritual.
Yeah, showing how individual personality shapes these general principles. But the underlying drivers managing conflict, handling arousal, tapping into ancient scripts, those seem fundamental.
So for the listener and anyone who's seen this, what you witnessed when your dog did that bone dance isn't just some weird quirk. It's actually a really powerful glimpse into the depth and complexity of how dogs perceive and navigate their world.
Totally. It's your dog actively working through a pretty complex internal experience right there in your living room.
It really gives you a new appreciation, doesn't it?
It really does. Understanding the motivations, the sensory stuff, the conflict resolution, those ancestral echoes, It deepens how you see them. When you see that bow and circle, you're literally watching history and complex thought processes play out.
It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other everyday dog behaviors, things we just see as slightly odd or funny, might be similarly rooted in these deep instincts and complex internal states that we just haven't really stopped to deep dive into yet?
Great question to ponder.
Well, thank you so much again to the listener for providing the sources that let us take this really fascinating deep dive into the bone ritual.
Yes, thank you. And we hope this encourages everyone listening to keep observing your own dog's behavior with fresh eyes and lots of curiosity. You never know what you might discover about their amazing inner world.